What's up, Redemption? How are we doing this morning? Glad that you're here to celebrate that Jesus is alive. How many of you had the opportunity to go away for spring break? All right, how many of you went to Florida? Okay, it seems like 98% of Michigan goes to Florida, right? My family, we had the opportunity to go visit my sister-in-law in California, kind of our first journey on a plane with our kids. And so we went to Disneyland one day, and before we got to the park, we spent a little bit of time on YouTube trying to best figure out how to dominate Disneyland and get the most out of our time. You see, we wanted to develop a step-by-step plan to be the most successful we could with our time in the park. And so we spent a lot of time watching some videos, got some input, and we developed a list on our phones of how we're going to tackle the park. And we started in the lame treats like Fantasyland for kids with like Peter Pan from 1960. If you know what I'm talking about, all those rides are super lame, but it was okay. The kids loved it, and they had a ton of fun. And so it was a very successful trip for us. Listen, the question I want us to wrestle with this morning is this: because Jesus is alive, what's your next step? Because Jesus is alive, what's your next step? You see, in a room this size, we have people that are followers of Jesus, and we have people that are not followers of Jesus, and we're glad that everybody is here this morning. But the point is this: no matter where you're at with Jesus right now, there's always a next step to be had. There's always a next step that you can actually take. You see, so as we gather at Redemption, the resurrection is the most crucial event of the Christian faith. In fact, if the resurrection didn't happen, then we actually would be wasting our time. And so let me just share with you 5 quick realities of Jesus being alive. All right, the first is this: because Jesus is alive, that means there is a God. Number 2, it means that Jesus is God. Number 3, it means that God's word is true. Number 4, it means that heaven and hell are real. And number 5, it means that your response to Jesus determines where you will spend eternity. You see, what's true is this: every one of us is going to spend eternity somewhere. That's what's true for every one of us. And so if the resurrection is actually not true, then we're stuck in our sin, and our faith is absolutely worthless. We're going to start in Mark chapter 16 this morning. We're going to look through the life of Peter today and what the resurrection did in his life, and to see what it can do in ours. And in Mark chapter 16, it's the resurrection story. And the story starts out in verse 1 through 3 with 3 women going to visit Jesus' body at the tomb because they wanted to perfume his body as a final act of devotion. And what's important to know is that 2 of these 3 women were actually at the cross when Jesus died. And so their conversation on the way to the tomb is this: how are we going to remove the stone that's in front of the tomb to actually get to Jesus' body? And it says this in verse 4 of Mark 16. It says, "And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, 'Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him.'" So what does the man, the angel, do? He identifies that they're alarmed, that these 3 women are actually afraid. And he says, "Come and check out Jesus where he was. He was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. Come in the tomb." He invited them in to actually see the very place where Jesus actually was laid. And they noticed all that was there is clothes. You see, he was aware of their distress, and so the angel speaks news, the greatest news, to them, and he invites them in to come and see this Jesus, the Jesus, to be honest, they've already previously known. You see, the angel speaks the gospel to the tomb that took Jesus in, that received him, and the tomb that gave Jesus up. And because the tomb is empty, that changes everything. But notice what he says in verse 7 to these 3 women. He says, "But go, tell the disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." And they went out and they fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. What does he say in verse 7? But go tell the disciples and Peter. Well, who's Peter and why is he mentioned separate from the rest of the disciples? Listen, Peter was a fisherman by trade. And when he decided to follow Jesus, he actually left everything, including his family business. And he went all in. He put all the chips on the table to follow Jesus. We know that Peter is often described as the leader of the disciples. In fact, oftentimes you can see him in the New Testament kind of running his mouth a little bit. He was a spokesperson and he often spoke out of term. In fact, at one point, he rebuked Jesus. There's another story where Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane was praying and getting his heart ready for the crucifixion that was about to come. And he told his disciples to spend some time praying. And Peter, the bold one, he actually fell asleep. But what's unique is that Peter had all sorts of names in the Bible. He has the name Simon, which was his name before he came to know Jesus. He has the name Peter, which is his name after he came to know Christ. And then Jesus actually gave him the name The Rock. Now, not The Rock, the wrestler, and the movie star who has muscles bulging out of his neck. I'm not talking about that Rock. But Jesus gave him the name The Rock because he had a plan for Peter's life that he is going to use Peter to extend his mission and his church throughout the world. And Peter was going to be one of the founding pillars of the movement of Jesus in the world. But here's what's true. The angel wanted the women to know and the disciples to know that Jesus is alive, but he also mentions Peter separately. He wants Peter to know that Jesus is alive. Why? Listen, we're going to see this morning that Peter, he's going to blow it big time. And so Peter needs to know that there's another beginning. Peter needs to know that hope is here. He needs to know that forgiveness is possible. He needs to know that you can actually have spiritual peace. And so we saw in verse 8 how the women left the tomb. They were astonished. They were seized by amazement. They actually were afraid. And here's the point. Anytime God's power breaks through creation, the response is always the same. It's always a human response of fear. But the question is this. If the resurrection offers hope to Peter, can it offer hope to us? You see, because Jesus is alive, what's your next step? I'm going to make 3 observations out of the life of Peter from 3 different texts this morning. And the first is this: because Jesus is alive, you have freedom from your failure. In Luke chapter 22, if you have your Bible, we can look at it together, but it'll be on the screen as well. Jesus has a conversation with Peter, and he says this in verse 31, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you turn again, that you'll strengthen your brothers. And Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me. So think about this text. Think about what the angel said in Mark 16. Go tell the disciples and Peter. You see, Peter is about to blow it significantly. He's about to fail Jesus in a huge way. And here's what Jesus tells him. He says, hey, Peter, behold, meaning listen to what I'm about to say. Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. Satan, the devil, the enemy. You see, Peter, he didn't ask. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He demanded to have you. Did you notice what Jesus does though in verse 32? Look at it again. It says this, but I prayed for you, Peter. Jesus prayed for Peter. And what was Jesus' prayer? His prayer was this. He prayed that Peter's faith would not fail. Notice that Jesus did not pray that Peter wouldn't fail. Notice that Jesus did not pray that Peter wouldn't sin. He simply prayed that your faith would not fail, that your faith would actually prevail. And so what is Jesus implying? He's implying this, that Peter is going to blow it. And so Peter, after Satan gets his hands on you and he takes your life and he turns it upside down, here's what I want you to do, Peter. I want you to turn again, turn back to me, and I want you to strengthen the brothers. Here's a question I have. Why does Satan want to shake up Peter's life? Why is he going after Peter? Why not the other disciples? Why is he going after him? Listen, The reason he's going after Peter is because Peter's a threat to the kingdom of darkness. Are you? Because here's the truth. Satan isn't interested in tearing anyone's life apart unless they love Jesus passionately and want to see God's kingdom expand in our world. That's the kind of man or woman that Jesus wants to actually take down. That Satan wants to take down. So you think about this story, and we think about what's happening. Peter was actually a threat. But the question I also have is this: why would Jesus not say no to Peter's request? Like, why does he say yes? Why doesn't he say, hey, Satan, don't make demands of me. That's not going to work. Or why does he just say, Peter is one of my own. You may not have him. I love Peter. He's mine. Why does Jesus allow it to happen? The answer is this: what is your life like when all you have left is your faith? You see, at Redemption Church, we have a lot of people that have suffered significant things in their life. Significant. You're going to hear some of that later. We've had people lose jobs that were significant. We've had people battle crazy sickness, and we've had people lose loved ones, including their own children and their own parents and their own grandparents, like big things that people have actually dealt with. My wife battled cancer for 7 years, and it came back 4 different times. Listen, there's times when all we have left is our faith, and we have to figure out what we're going to do with it. And that's what Jesus is praying for when it comes to Peter. And I feel like the message that Jesus is telling Peter is this: hey, Peter, your faith can never be trusted if it's not tested. A tested faith is a trusted faith. If it's not tested, it's not trusted. And so we know when we look at this that Jesus works through the gospel, and he's in the business of taking rebels and using them for his own glory. And so what is Peter's response? We read it. Peter tells Jesus, I will go to prison for you. I will actually die for you. Like, his ignorance is actually revealed. And Jesus is like, listen, Peter, you're not going to die for me today. You're going to disown me. Hey, Peter, I know you better than you know you. And so while you're so confident that you're going to die for me, I want you to know you're actually today going to do the exact opposite. You're going to disown me publicly. And I don't know about you, but I can relate with Peter. Ever talked a big game and not come through? Ever made a mess in your life with decisions you've made? Ever failed people around you? You see, here's what Jesus is saying. Hey, Peter, in a few hours from now, on this very day, you're going to deny me. And later in the same chapter, in Luke chapter 22, Jesus is arrested. He's eventually going to be put on trial, eventually crucified on the cross. We know 3 days later he rises from the dead, but after he's arrested, Peter follows from a distance. And he sees these people standing around this fire warming themselves. And so Peter goes and he gathers with the other men and women around this fire to keep warm. And of course, a fire creates light. And so people could see people's faces. And someone says to Peter, aren't you one of Jesus' followers? And Peter's like, no, I'm not. No, I am not. A little later, a person says, hey, aren't you one that was following Jesus around? And Peter's like, yeah, no, I'm not. It wasn't me. And the text actually says an hour later, a man looks at him and says, you too are Galileans, so surely you are a follower of Jesus. And Peter says this in verse 60. He says it this way, but Peter said, man, I do not know what you're talking about. And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and he wept bitterly. Are you hearing what's happening? The text says the words were still in his mouth. Like, they're still coming out, his denial. In the middle of it, the rooster crows. And then Peter turns and he sees Jesus' face. By the way, if the resurrection's not true, that is Peter's last memory of Jesus. And so Peter had terrible guilt and shame, because what Jesus predicted would happen happened on that same day. And Peter leaves with great sorrow, and he's living his life now being defined by his sin. Listen, have you ever felt like a failure? Ever failed as a husband and as a dad? Have you ever failed as a wife or as a mom? Ever failed as a friend? Have you ever wished that you could just hit the rewind button and go back an hour, a minute, maybe a day, a month, years to get another try at something that happened in your life? Have you ever failed someone so bad you wish you just wanted a redo? You want to try that again? You'd make a different decision this time? You'd handle things in a different way? You see, that's Peter, and it's called sin. And to you, I want to say, welcome to the club. You see, our lives are defined ultimately by this thing called sin. And here's the truth. You can live your life defined by your sin, or you can live your life defined by the resurrection of Jesus. And those lead to two different places in our hearts and in our lives. And so Peter blows it big time, and it's in the life of Peter that I see myself, a failure, a man who's failed over and over and over again in his life, and I don't always get it right, and I say things I shouldn't say. I run my mouth in a way at times, just like Peter. I put my foot in my mouth, and it's like, man, I'm just like this guy. I fail miserably. I live for the glory of myself. But because Jesus is alive, what's your next step? Here's the second thing we'll see. Because Jesus is alive this morning, you are actually freed by grace. You are freed by grace. Here's the thing. The resurrection of Jesus speaks hope to your sin. And so if you remember what the angel, the man at the tomb told the women, go tell the disciples that Jesus will meet them in Galilee. And so we pick up the story in John chapter 21 where Jesus is waiting to go hang out with the disciples, and Peter with the other disciples have gone back to fishing, going back to what they know best. By the way, your sin is never a reason to check out in your relationship with Jesus. But they're fishing on the Sea of Tiberias, which is also the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus shows up on the shore. And Jesus does a miracle for the disciples that he's previously done in their life with fishing. And he yells, hey, why don't you throw your nets on the other side of the boat? And so the disciples, who are professional fishermen, are like, yo, we don't need your help. Like, we know what we're doing. But that's not what they did. They were catching nothing. They threw their nets on the other side of the boat, and they caught like 500 fish. And Peter knew immediately who it was on the shore, because there's only one person who could do that kind of miracle. So he takes off his outer robe. He dives in the water. He swims all the way to Jesus, because Jesus is the only one who can provide what he's looking for in this moment. And when Peter gets to shore, Jesus has a little fire ready for him and all the disciples to eat breakfast. And this fire is incredibly intentional by Jesus, because the last time the Bible records Peter being on a fire, he denied him. I know Jesus wants him to come back to the fire so they can have a conversation about the recent past. And so Jesus can remove those memories. Think about the courtyard. Peter standing around the fire denying Jesus. Think about the rooster crowing, him seeing Jesus' face. You see, the presence of Jesus at this point in Peter's life shows us that Jesus was still on Peter's side despite his failing and despite his sin. And that's what the resurrection does, friends. It provides hope. It heals our past. It frees us from the past, and it frees us to a future. And so the resurrection declares that you matter to him. You matter. No matter the mess, no matter the sin, make no mistake, every one of us has denied Jesus with our lives, but you matter to him. We all need a great Savior. And by the way, Jesus is the only person in your life that you could fail over and over and over again, and he'll still come to the shoreline of your life, inviting relationship for you to come to him. Over and over again, he'll keep calling your name and keep asking you to come. But it's in John 21, they're sitting around the fire. And it says this in verse 15. It says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, Peter, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and will carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show the kind of death which he would glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. You see, Jesus asked Peter around this fire 3 times if he loves him. And the reason he asked him 3 times is because Peter denied him 3 times. And so think about the question, hey, Peter, do you love me more than these? Peter, do you love me more than your fishing career? More than the fishing boats? More than the nets and the fishing gear that you have? Do you love me more than fish? And he says, yes. Jesus says, do you love me more than your friends? Yes, I love you the most. And what does Jesus say to the 3 questions, or Peter say to the 3 questions? I love you. And Jesus responds by saying, feed my sheep, tend to my sheep. And eventually in verse 19, he says, follow me. What is Jesus doing in this moment? You see, Jesus is the life-altering Savior of second chances. And he wanted Peter to know this. It's not 3 strikes and you're out. Hey, Peter, you get another chance at bat. Go get the bat. Get up to home plate. Let's give this another run together. I'm never going to quit on you. Hey, Peter, just because you disown me, I will never disown you. Peter, there's a mulligan. As a kid, I used to play regular Nintendo in the 80s with my dad and my brother. And we used to play this game called Baseball Stars. And it was an awesome baseball game. It's still awesome to this day, in case you didn't know. But what would happen is we were all in the same league. We would all play our games. And then at the end of the league, we get to see who finished first or second or third. And I always finish first because I'm the best, okay? That's just how it works. But here's what happened as a 6-year-old. If I was going to lose the game, there's a little reset button on the Nintendo. You hit the button, you get to go again. You know what I mean? So I would hit the button and I would win all my games. My older brother's like, how are you 4 years younger than me and finding ways to always win? I'm just better than you. I don't know what to say. You see, I wanted a mulligan. I wanted a redo. I wanted a second, third, fourth, fifth chance. And that's what Jesus is saying he offers us. Because even when we disown him, he will never disown you. You see, here's what Jesus is telling Peter. Hey, Peter, around this fire, you've declared your love for me. And I want you to know something. It's right here at this fire that the guilt and shame, it stays here. The failure of your past, we don't need to talk about it anymore. It's done. It's over. It's done with. Keep it here. And here's what happened in Peter's life in this moment. Peter encountered grace. And so guess what happens when a hard heart encounters grace? It changes you from the inside out. You see, when God's great grace meets the greatest failure of your life, right, you get to lay that failure down and it is done with. And God wants to move on with you in a relationship. And so for Peter, just to be honest, this is the moment that changed Peter's life forever. When was that for you? His grace. Because Jesus is alive. What's your next step? Listen, because Jesus is alive, there's freedom from failure. There's freedom because of his grace. But then we'll see thirdly that you are free to be bold. You are free to be bold. Peter's life continues, and actually the next book, 2 pages later, if you had your Bible open, you could turn to Acts 2, and you'd actually see this, that Peter stands up as someone who's just received Jesus' grace in a crazy way, and he blasts out the gospel. And I'm sitting here thinking, is this not the same guy who denied Jesus, had no boldness, and now all of a sudden he's blasting out the gospel to thousands of people? Yeah. It's Jesus' work in Peter's life. And so now he's speaking and blasting out the gospel. And so where does this boldness come from? Listen, it comes from his encounter with grace. It comes with his greatest moment of failure and Jesus meeting him in that moment and giving him a second opportunity. And so when we see Peter being bold and sharing the gospel message with the world around him, he's not a man of failure. He's actually a freed man. He's not a guilty man. He's free in his boldness to share the gospel. And what was the response of the people? Well, in Acts 2:41, it says this. So those who received his word, they were baptized, and they were out of that day about 3,000 souls. Here's what happened. Peter's life was changed forever around the fire. He goes and he blasts out the gospel, and 3,000 people say, you know what, I'm a sinner too. I need what Peter has. And they respond to the gospel, and they're actually baptized. 3,000 people in that moment. You see, for Peter, his sins of the past did not define his future. Why? Because the resurrection saves us from something, and the resurrection saves us to something. The resurrection saves you from your sin. It saves you from God's wrath because Jesus took it instead. It saves you from hell, and it saves you to relationship, right, with the living, reigning Son of God. But make no mistake, having boldness will cost you. And for Peter, his boldness cost him his life. We know of the 12 disciples that originally followed Jesus, where Peter was a leader. 11 of them died as a martyr because of their faith in Christ. One of them, John, didn't die because of his faith, but he was boiled in oil, so he had his own pain that he went through. Here's the point. The boldness of Jesus, to them, it was worth it, and it cost them their life. And we know that Peter, as Jesus mentioned in John 21, verse 19, that Peter, you're going to die. And how did Peter die? He died being hung upside down on a cross in Rome because he was unworthy to be crucified upright like Jesus. It cost him everything. Boldness. The resurrection produced this in him, because if the resurrection's not true, if Jesus was still dead, why would these men put their life on the line? They wouldn't do it. And so our gospel takeaway this morning is this. Jesus stepped out of the grave so you can step into the life. And there's life in this world, and then there's the life. And those are very different things. And so I ask you the same question for the 10th time this morning. Because Jesus is alive, what's your next step? And let me just give you 3 of them, 3 steps that we could all take. Right, the first is this, is that you could trust Jesus as your Savior. And I just want you to know that this day is ordained by God. God knew that you were going to be here on this very morning, on Easter 2022, to hear about the good news that he's offering you in your life. You see, salvation is about trusting Jesus, and in light of you being a sinner just like me, you meet a God who's greater than your sin, who lived a perfect life. He died on the cross in your place, and he rose from the dead, declaring victory over all sin and all death in the world, and he personally wants to have a relationship with you. And here's the best part, it's free. There's no performance you need to put forward. There's nothing you need to do. You just need to accept it. That's the good news of Jesus. Here's the second step. It could be baptism. We know biblical baptism is believers getting baptized. It is the biblical pattern we see all in the New Testament. We could talk about Peter's message in Acts 2:41. How did they respond after they believed? They were baptized. We could talk about, right, the Great Commission in Matthew 28, where Jesus says, go to the nations, baptizing them, and are making disciples and baptizing them, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We could talk about Jesus, what he did and what he said. He himself was baptized by immersion. And so if you've not been baptized and you are a believer, there's not a better day to be baptized than today. Because when you're baptized, here's what's happening. You're going down under the water to identify with Jesus' death and his burial. And you're coming up out of the water to identify with the life that Jesus has given you through the power of the resurrection. Here's the thing about baptism, friends. I just want to be clear. Baptism doesn't save you. You don't receive more grace when you get baptized. But baptism is an act of obedience to God's call in the scriptures. And so we will always are going to call you to be obedient to what the Bible actually says. If you know Christ, today's the day to be baptized. And here's the third step that could be for you, to be bold for the gospel. Hey, listen, Redemption Church exists for a purpose. We don't exist to play games. We don't exist just to come and gather on a Sunday morning. We're on a mission together of connecting people to Jesus for life change. And as a pastor who's 40 years old, Jesus is still changing my life. So we know people that need to know Jesus. So who have you been praying for? And how have you shared your story? And how have you demonstrated boldness with the gospel in your life? Who's that person in your life that doesn't know Christ, that needs to know Christ? And so as we close, I just want us to take a moment and pray. As we just bow our heads and close our eyes for a moment. As we think about these 3 steps, because Jesus is alive, as you think about the three, here's the question I have for you. How many of you would say, yep, one of these three steps I need to take? Would you just want to raise your hand? One of these three steps for me, I need to take with boldness. All right, just raise, I need to do one of these three. Thank you. And so the first step is about trusting Jesus as Savior. And so if you're here this morning, you've never placed your faith and trust in Jesus, you've never embraced the good news of the gospel of the resurrection, and today's the day that you want to do that, would you just raise your hand so I can pray for you? I'd love to pray for you. Thank you. Let's pray together. And if you want to place your faith in Jesus, you can do that right in your own seat, just between you and the Lord. There's no magic words to say. He understands the posture of your heart, but just take a moment and confess that you're a sinner and that you need Jesus, that you need his forgiveness. Declare to him that you want to have faith in him and have him be Lord of your life. Jesus, I just want to pray for those who are in the room this morning and joining us online. I know there's people here and people who are joining in that don't know you. And so I want to pray that today will be the day, Lord, that they will step out in faith and put their faith in you. That you are the God, Lord, who rose from the dead. That you've defeated our sin and you've defeated death. Lord, I want to pray for people here to come to know you, that they'll step in a faith journey with you, in a loving relationship with you, and accept the free gift that you are offering them. In your name, amen. The second step is about baptism. And so if you've not been baptized as a believer, we'd love for you to be baptized today. There's not a better day to get baptized than Easter Sunday, right here to identify with the resurrection of Jesus. It's an opportunity for you to publicly declare your commitment to Christ. It's an opportunity for you to declare, I identify with Jesus, with his death and with his burial and with his resurrection, that he has brought new life in me. And by the way, this is the easiest command in the Bible, right? To follow Jesus. And I know it takes boldness, but if we won't be bold in here, we won't be bold out there. And so we just want to encourage you to get baptized if you know Christ and you haven't been. Today's the day to actually do that. And we of course remove every barrier we can. And so I know your family might not be here, but we have it captured on video. We have all the proper clothes for you to wear. We have shorts and t-shirts, undergarments. We have makeup, and we have everything you need to look just as awesome as you do right now. You can look just as awesome when you leave, okay? We've removed it all. And so we'd love for you to respond to the gospel and respond to God's call in your life to follow in Jesus' footsteps and follow through with his command. And so we're gonna sing, and if you want to get baptized, you may step right out over to my left, your right, and we'll have a team ready to meet you there to get you ready to get you into the tank if you've not been baptized. And so today is the day, all right? Let's stand together and worship Jesus.